Hi everyone, and welcome to, I think it's our eighth, which is, and hopefully the final of our sessions of our little shiurim, mini shiurim here, these episodes, working through the introduction of the guide for the Perplexed, the Moreh Nevuchim. So it's the fourth introduction, the Akdama now, Sibois Astiros. Now he's going to talk about contradictions, and this is, in a way, the part that's going to make learning the Moreh, learning the guide, potentially the most difficult, and potentially the key to understanding it all. He says like this, that why are there contradictions in any book? Ayin Negodim, right, or statement, or statements that lead to opposite conclusions that can be found in Echad Svarim in any book, or one of the larger compilations. There are 7 possible reasons why this might be. They're not all, he's going to say in the guide, it's not going to be all 7, right? The first possibility is the book quotes lots of different people who think differently. Perhaps he deleted the specific authors and just kept the list of quotes. Didn't announce this one's opinion, this one's that one's opinion. Right, same principle. In other words, they are different opinions. So people who think differently have all been assembled into single work. Second possibility is while writing the work, the same author thought differently. Perhaps they were working over many years, and at the beginning they were thinking one way, and by the time they came to the end, they thought differently. And so now if you look carefully, you'll notice differences in the way they're writing. Especially remember in those days, you didn't just typeset and go back and redelete. You were writing on paper for years and then assembling the whole thing afterwards, potentially. Okay, but this could happen in any work that's been written over a period of time. The third, or even written in a short period of time, if a person's thinking about the idea again and again, is slightly changing their mind, but it's not important enough to reword. But if you look very, very carefully, the words, listen very carefully and analyze them, you pick up differences. The third possibility is it could be that not everything is as it's taken on a simple level. Some of them are meant on a simple level, and some of them are analogies and metaphors and have a deeper level to them. Or perhaps there are 2 analogies and stories, metaphors being brought, but both of them, the message is not the analogy, which might contradict itself. And if you understand them on a superficial level, they will seem like contradictions, but actually the point that's being made is not a contradiction. The fourth possibility is there's a reason why a certain point can't be fully developed yet at this stage in the writing. So for example, you might be writing, I don't know, let's say a book of, you're teaching a child about chemistry and you say electrons or physics, electrons are like little balls that orbit a nucleus. You can't yet explain to us not quite what it is. So you use that at that phase, and later on you develop the idea and then you can be more precise. And now there's a contradiction, but at this stage you weren't yet able to develop the idea, right? And for whatever reason, you're not yet able to give the full picture here. So you use a picture here that you're going to make more precise later on, and you'll think, they contradict each other. No, they don't. This is just, you got to understand that the writer was assuming you read it in order and develop ideas as you go through. Siba Chamish is the fifth one, is that right? There's a pedagogical issue, an issue of teaching and making things understood. Something that's very, very difficult to grasp and understand. And you need to bring it early in now to help make something else clarified. So you're using a principle now that's not been fully developed and explained to explain something else. Because usually try and start with easier material. There's actually more like the analogy I said before with the electron here, probably is this one here. They're both cases where both the fourth one and fifth one are both situations where you're developing ideas all the way through. In the fourth case, you just haven't yet explained the concept. In the fifth case, you might actually have to bring a concept too early and therefore not explain it. Ultimately, the fourth and fifth have a certain similar property, namely that the contradiction comes because for whatever reason, you didn't explain the thing that needed explaining right now because you couldn't, because you're busy explaining it. There's only so many things you can explain at once. And that produces, and the not well explained concept right now will sound like a contradiction to how it's explained better later or to other things that will appear. You start with lighter material. Right, so you need to start with lighter levels of understanding and depth, and you go deeper as you go through. So just give enough now of what you need right now. And later you go deeper into it. Okay, so far we've had 5 reasons, right? Again, just to quickly hazel them over. The first one is you collected ideas from different people. Second one is the author themselves changed their mind. Third one is that you're taking things literally where the meaning isn't the literal. The meaning is the metaphor or something like that. The fourth one is that sometimes you're introducing ideas without fully explaining. And the fifth one is sometimes you have no choice but to do that because you need to bring in an idea now, but it can't be fully explained now. You just need enough to get the person to where they need to get to. And later on they'll have more concepts and be able to understand it properly. So the fourth and fifth are similar. Siba Shish is the sixth explanation, is Oimaka Stira, is there's a hidden contradiction. It's not obvious that this actually leads to a contradiction. Something that needs to be teased out with a lot of logic and a lot of premises and many steps, and that's going to be more and more concealed. It's possible the author themselves didn't notice this idea, when you couple it with another set of principles, leads you down to this conclusion. And this idea over here, coupled with other premises, leads you to another conclusion. And they don't realize that ultimately it's going to be contradiction. When you properly give them all these pieces of information that, yes, I agree with that. Yes, I agree with that. Okay, I can see that. And now I can see that couple that all together with the first thing I wrote, it will lead you in this direction. And take the same and other principles, which I also agree with, and take it, the second idea will now lead to another. And they weren't aware of it when they wrote it. And then it suddenly produced this difficult point. And this is things like this actually happen, and sometimes even great chachamim can make a mistake over here. Wise people as well, learned people. If they were obvious and revealed, you just forgot the first thing when you wrote the second one. That's not the way a person should not be writing, so that by the time they're finishing their work, they've forgotten what they wrote at the beginning. They should go over it again. That's not a serious work. A serious work could end up with a contradiction. There's really not an obvious contradiction until you see what it comes out. As a result of this way of thinking, it will lead you in this direction. As a result of this way. Now that's much more complex, and it may take many people in the future to point out to whose work together will derive the contradiction. But Asiba Shvius, the seventh reason is Hechrach Advarim Be'inyan. This one you got to listen to now the most. Be'inyanim Amukim Ma'oid. There might be things that are very, very deep. You have to hide certain things and you have to reveal certain things. Now, we know the Rambam is going to say this is going to be his one, right? Or at least one of the types. So what you've got to do in this type of way is to allow a conversation to unfold, allowing an assumption in it that you don't actually hold of. And allow another conversation to unfold following a different premise that you're not going to go with either. Right? The masses should not be able to understand as the source of the contradiction between these two. Right? And certain things that require tremendous amount of concealment. So let's give an example. Suppose that the Rambam wants to tell you in a certain place that you can only think about Hashem negatively, right? You can only use negative attribution. You can't say Hashem is kind, because kindness then we think of a human attribute. You can say he's not cruel, right? You can't say he's got lots of knowledge, because you can say he's not lacking knowledge. And then elsewhere, he wants to tell you about how you can actually be on a journey of grasping things closer and closer to Hashem. So that's clearly going to be very contradictory, and yet not really a contradiction, but it could be understood as a contradiction. It will come out as a contradiction. So when you lead one discussion, to make it very clear enough that the masses understand what's going on, you're going to need to take certain premises and principles. And when you take the other discussion, even though they're not really ultimately a contradiction, because, right, so that's exactly the sort of thing which I think, by the way, you do see in this work, that type of contradiction. And that's exactly the sort of thing which he says needs to be hidden from them. Generally speaking, in Shas, when you find a lot of contradictions in Brisas, Mishnais, often the Gemara will say, yeah, this is Rabbi Yossi and this is Rabbi Meir. Right? So that's the first category, where there were different authors, and sometimes Stam Mishnah, sometimes the writings of the ancient rabbinic law are written, and the authorship of different components is actually distinct, and therefore it looks like a contradiction, but it's only because you don't know the source material. And once you find the source material, and once you can work out this is consistent with this line of thinking, then you solve that problem. Sometimes they'll say the early teaching in the Mishnah contradicts the second half. The early part was according to Rabbi so-and-so, Rav Yehuda, and Seifas Reb Shimon, or whatever, Rabbi Dvar, Rabbi Ploni, and Rabbi, the person who was redacting and editing all these Mishnais, agreed with Rav Yehuda in this position, and this halacha, and the Reb Shimon in that one. Even though they seem like they're linked, they don't have to be linked, and that's why you come up with something that seems inconsistent, but it actually isn't. Or sometimes is inconsistent, but you have to know the source material. All the way through the Gemara, you got things like this, analyzing the Mishnah or the Brisa. It's too much to count. Now, when you find contradictions in sugis in the Gemara, the Rambam says, that's not necessarily the same thing. You do find that, but you also have the second one, which is that remember, the Gemara is being written over a 60-year period. So it's possible that in a sugya, and it actually was really being written over more than a century, because it really began to be written in the 4th generation out of the 6th of the Amoraim. And therefore you can have things that were once held off and later on rejected, right? And therefore you can end up with Gemaras even that seem to contradict one another. So you'll say, Kach v'kach siba sova karebi ploni. Sorry. Yeah. So you'll find like the first instance where they held like so-and-so rabbi and then so-and-so rabbi, just like in the Mishnah. They agrees with him in one and argues with him in the other. Sometimes you have two opinions according to Rabbi X, two different interpretations of him. All that type of sugya, anyway, you see that in the Gemara, that's the first category. But you also find the second category. This particular Rav changed their mind. You have that explicit in the Talmud at certain points. Rava rejected his early thinking. And then you have to work out which was the later one. In the early edition of teaching, Rav Ashi said this, and later he'll say this. So most of the contradictions in the Mishnah and Gemara are like this. Now, what about contradictions that appear in the prophecies? That's the third and the fourth. Right? Third one, remember, is that things are being given metaphorically as analogies, and therefore they cannot. You'll make a mistake. You think the prophet's saying this, but that's not. It's a code word for a deeper idea that doesn't contradict the other idea. Or the fourth one, sometimes he's teaching a principle now that needs to be fully elaborated upon later on. And really, that was the goal of all of this. Right? Remember, all my general set of introductions was actually to teach you what to do with the prophet. You remember that Rav Amram of the Gaonim of the great teachers before the rabbis after the rabbis of the Gemara says like this. Vaydat Yuridina Kamar of Amram, Amarim, how much they said, Zal, the rabbi said, that one verse says one thing, one says another, and then they work out what's the contradiction. One is missing a condition, or they're dealing with a different circumstance. Amram, Shlomo, let's say King Solomon says, King Solomon, you're contradicting your father, and you're contradicting yourself. And yet we come up with an answer to that, right? He's talking about in Koheles, in Ecclesiastes, the Gemara Shabbos, Daf Lamed, where they believe there are contradictions in the same book and then they realize they're not. There's a harbor, many things like this, because when you get to the depth of the statement is not what it sounds like it's meant to be. So in the prophetic works, that's generally the rule. If you think there's a contradiction, you misunderstood what's going on. Generally, you do find that also in the rabbinic writings, but much more in the prophetic text, whether it's to do with laws or whether it's to do with ethical teachings. We are only interested in things where you will find contradictions on the simple reading of them. And some of these will clarify. Because this matter also is or leads to the secrets of Torah. Oh, then the seventh type in the prophets. The seventh type, remember, where something is being deliberately concealed because the masses shouldn't detect the contradiction. That, he says, we shouldn't jump the gun and make an automatic assumption on. One needs to think about. And when the Rambam says that, he's probably alluding to something over here. Now, when you got contradictions in true philosophical works, he has other works he considers not very true. If we go through the guide thoroughly, you'll see which ones he puts in which category. They are generally in the fifth category, right? What was the fifth category? That they're teaching information, so they've got to give you the incomplete scientific information now, and then give you more complete later on. Most people who write books, so he's obviously not talking about the great rabbinic works, certainly not the Shas and so on, not talking about the prophets, the Nevi'im, not even talking about the philosophers, but general, very common to find contradictions. Now, this includes, he allows midrashim. You can find multiple reasons why you might have contradictions in the midrashim, including the seventh reason, hiding the real depth of this midrash, right? But in other words, midrashim, you can find many types of contradictions in where some it's because they're metaphors and you got to understand the deeper reason. Some it is because they are sometimes hiding deeper lessons of Torah where the masses shouldn't really have access to it right now, and so on. If you find mistakes in this work, you should know that they are, that last thing was also the Siba Shishis, also the sixth one, where it can be that certain things are not obvious contradictions too, and they can also, not obvious until you tease them out fully and compare and so on. So fine, lots of books have those in. Potentially he's even saying Midrashim, how that is, we're not going to go into now. But in this book, you will only find contradictions of the fifth type and the seventh type. Fifth type again means I got to assume a principle now in this chapter, which later I'm going to change. But right now, I can't give you too much. You're not ready to hear the deeper idea yet, right? So I'm giving it to you on the simpler plane, right? And later on, it will look like contradictions to earlier, and you realize it was just a stepping stone. You had to climb on this sort of basic idea, and then as you got more sophisticated, you could introduce a more sophisticated idea, which will outweigh the earlier idea. Or the seventh, that I'm telling you something which, if I made it too clear, the masses would would be led in terrible directions, and therefore I've got to hide the contradiction, and I got to assume a contradictory premise here and here in order to take you on the journey. When you look into it carefully, you'll see there's contradictions, and I've hidden those contradictions. I haven't made them explicit, but actually it's because I need to take you on both journeys. That's essentially what he's saying over there. Now, that's what you'll find in this book, which of course opens up, so what are these contradictions, right? And this again gives permission for people to start to find all sorts of things in the guide. I didn't say it, that's the hidden contradiction, right? This is one thing you got to keep a look out for. And hopefully if we study it together, I'll show you what I think is the main set of contradictions there. After all these now I'm going to start bringing Havas Hashemas, now I'm going to start actually finally going through these words that I promised you I'm going to clarify and explain. But we now know he's not just doing it to give you a dictionary, he's doing it to take you all the way on the journey. And he's building pictures that are going to help us understand. We now know that he's going to clarify lots and lots of words like Tselem Elokim and all these image of God and feet. What does it mean that we talk about Tachas Raglav, under the feet of God? Does that literally mean that? And all these other things. What does it mean to see Hashem? What does it mean Hashem sees? What do all these things mean? But we now know that he's going to also take us on diversions, which is to build a picture. We know this is in place in the book of prophecy. And we know the goal of this ultimately is to teach us the secrets of Torah. We know it's to help the person who's developed their understanding of the natural sciences to the point where they got these contradictions, but ultimately is to take that person on the journey all the way through Ma'aser Bereishis, the level of the understanding creation in the physical sense, understanding its deeper level of causal reality, understanding what's behind that, understanding what's the Ma'aser Merkava, the works of the chariot and all that vision, all the way climbing the ladder upwards. Right? That's what all this is there for. And this should be a key. These chapters should be keys to unlocking these gates. When you open these gates and walk through where the souls will achieve rest. Right? That will be a delight and it will be a pleasure. We saw and the that we'll all reach that kind of place of rest of our destiny, of where we wanted to get to. So this is really the key in many ways to give us the delight of the eyes, to give us the rest of to give us the goal of what we're looking for in life. And the goal of what we're looking for in life, according to Rambam, in many places is Yedias Hashem, is the deepest connection we can have with Hashem. And the deepest connection comes, according to Rambam, by taking our seichel, taking our mind, our grasp, and going on that journey. And that is where we're going to go. That is. So now I've had just these amazing chapters learning together. The introductions hopefully have given us an appetite to learn more. But even if they haven't given us appetite to learn more, hopefully they've at least opened our eyes to so many dimensions and aspects of the way the Rambam looked at Torah, looked at his role in revealing the Torah, and the level of depth and profundity that can exist in his sefer. That is the only way to give us the lightning on the dark journey, the journey out of the physicality of the analogy of Mishle, of the analogy of the seductress, into climbing the ladder of Yaakov, the Jacob's ladder, climbing all the way up. These beautiful things. It's been a pleasure learning so far. Hopefully we'll see you on future shiurim, future